Kia ora and welcome to the Happy Revolution podcast. My name is Rachel and I'm a student here at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. I'm joined by Anna, our guest host and dear friend, who is also a student here. Kia ora. In this episode, we chat with Craig Greenfield, founder of the Alongsiders movement and friend of ours who lives and works in Phnom Penh, Cambodia.
Craig has just released his new book, Subversive Mission, and we chat about missions, colonisation and how to walk alongside and befriend the poor. Rachel and I really enjoyed this conversation as we both had a season living in Cambodia and connecting with Craig and his work. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming.
Yeah, good to be.
So exciting. You haven't been in New Zealand a lot over the last few years, so...
I haven't. This is my first time back in 5 years.
Wow. So we're lucky to be able to have you on the podcast. And when do you return to Cambodia?
January.
So lucky. I think Anna and I feel really excited getting to kind of return to our memories of Cambodia.
Yeah, cool.
Through talking to you, yeah.
Cool.
Craig, can you tell us a bit about yourself and who you are and what your context is?
Yeah.
Sure. So my name's Craig Greenfield, and I actually grew up here in New Zealand, but I was born in Canada and have lived in the slums in Cambodia for more than 15 years. And so really wherever I go, I'm an outsider. Even here in New Zealand, I haven't been here for 5 years. So it's great to be back. But in many ways, I'm an outsider here as well. And so I kind of like to think that I'm an outsider who helps insiders become alongsiders. That's kind of the calling on my life. So I started a youth-led grassroots movement called Alongsiders International. And we ask young people around the world, but especially in some of the poorest, most non-Western places in the world, like across Asia and Africa and Latin America, although we're into Europe now, but we ask them to make a very simple but powerful commitment to walk alongside those who walk alone. And so in practice, what that means is we ask them, and these are young people, in their early 20s, late teens, to choose one at-risk child each from their own community. They're not crossing communities. They're not going across town. It's their neighbors. Choose one at-risk child and walk alongside that child. Encourage them, love them, coach them, make sure they're in school, help them with their homework, go fishing, but really just walk alongside those who walk alone. So that movement is now spread across 25 countries around the world. About 16,000 children and young people involved in the movement. And it's exciting to see what is happening outside of the West. We need perspective. So hopefully today we can explore a little bit about what's happening outside New Zealand and outside America, which dominates our news cycles.
You've spent some time kind of around Canada and New Zealand and Cambodia, as you said. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's been like living cross-culturally and across different contexts?
Actually, after we had been living in a Phnom Penh slum in Cambodia for 7 years, really with very little electricity or running water, very kind of impoverished situation, we moved to inner city Vancouver. And actually, many people don't realize, but Canada has this very poor postal code area, this very inner city area in Vancouver, with the most concentrated area of drug activity in North America. Thousands of injecting drug users and folks who are living homeless on the streets and people trapped in prostitution. And so that was very cross-cultural as well, although it was probably the closest we could find to an Asian slum where we could feel that sense of vibrancy and life and interconnectedness and doing life outside your house. We found that on the streets of Vancouver. But again, it was cross-cultural. I mean, I'm rocking up to Canada with my New Zealand accent, although to some of you probably it sounds like I have a Canadian accent, but to them I very much had a Kiwi accent. And it was cross-cultural. And I think in every new context, as followers of Jesus, we are interested in perhaps passionate about what good news looks like. What is good news? Jesus talked about good news. But to really discover that, I think we need to understand what the bad news is in any given context. So where we were coming from in Cambodia, in the slums, is a real sense of community. Now, I'm not saying that they're happy. You know, a lot of people go to these places and like, oh, the poor are so happy. They're smiling all the time. Actually, it's a real misunderstanding of their context. But they did have a sense of community. They knew their neighbors. They watched over each other's children. They helped each other when they were sick. There was a real sense of community in the slums of Cambodia. But when we went to Vancouver, we wanted to discover what is the bad news in a place like this. There's the obvious addictions and all of that. So we spent a few weeks, me and a mate, living on the streets of Vancouver, just as homeless men, experiencing a little bit of what our friends and neighbors were going through. And so one of the things that came out of that was just, wow, there's a real sense of isolation for our friends on the streets, a real sense of rejection. People would just ignore you as if you didn't exist. So we realized, well, if that's the bad news, then the good news from a Christian perspective, which as a person of faith, I'm very interested in that, the good news is the radical welcome of Jesus, welcoming those who are not always welcome in our society. So we just decided to open up our home. We lived in community with about a dozen of us in different homes that were interconnected. And each night we would open our table as a kind of an open table, see who shows up. And our motto was cook too much food, invite too many people. And we never knew how many people would show up each night, but it was usually somewhere between 20 and 40 people were there, and had a great time of just experiencing and living the teachings of Jesus in the midst of Vancouver's inner city.
So you've talked about living in Cambodia and in Canada, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the context in Cambodia and some of the history that shapes the way that being in that country is for you.
Yeah, so when we step into a place like Cambodia has obviously hundreds, if not thousands of years of history, a mighty nation that built Angkor Wat, one of the 7 wonders of the world. But over recent decades, and, you know, they were colonized by the French. Those who come with a white face are called Barang, which means French. So I'm a Barang, I'm a French colonizer. We step into a place where, you know, war has absolutely ravaged the nation of Cambodia. So in the 60s and early 70s, intellectuals from Cambodia went to France, went to learn from their colonizers, and began to learn about communism and what kind of what a revolution might look like in their own context. And they brought these ideas back. Pol Pot, many of you would have heard that name, was their leader. And so their vision was to take Cambodia back to year zero. Start again, blank sheet of paper. No more educated class, no more rich class. Everyone will be peasants, and together we will build the nation. Now, the Khmer Rouge were just a motley band of fighters until the Vietnam War with America. And so during the later years of the Vietnam War, America was dropping bombs on Vietnam and on Cambodia because the Viet Cong were crossing the border into the eastern regions of Cambodia. And so actually tons and tons, you know, some people say as many as 1 or even maybe 2 million tons of bombs were dropped on Cambodia. And so what happened was the Khmer Rouge leveraged that. They said, look at these imperialists, they're bombing us. You must turn to us. And so the numbers of these Khmer Rouge insurgents swelled from just a few thousand to tens of thousands. And so, again, like all of these things are interconnected. These what happens beyond our borders affects our brothers and sisters around the world. When we engage in military action, there are flow-on effects. Whenever we use violence as a tool for solving problems, there are all kinds of unintended and intended consequences. And so you can draw a direct line between American military intervention in Vietnam and the rise of the Khmer Rouge, who ultimately went on to take over Cambodia and killed over 1 million, maybe even 1.5 million of their own people in a purge, a massive purge. So, you know, a massive awful, terrible tragedy across the nation of Cambodia. And that was in the early 70s. Those who were educated were the first to be killed. Those who were city dwellers were also killed, and many others were forced into the countryside to try to grow rice. It was a massive disaster. These communist leaders who had been educated in France didn't know how to grow rice, so it was a terrible disaster. Many more hundreds of thousands died of starvation. If you can imagine what that would do to a nation. My own wife went through that process. She was a refugee, and when she was 5 years old, her mother said, they're now wanting to force you into the fields to work as well as a 5-year-old. Her name's Nay. She was malnourished. She was sickly. Her mother knew that if they forced her into the fields under the hot sun every day, she could probably die. My wife's mother managed to get $20 together and paid off a local passing truck driver. It was a fertilizer truck, and they got into the back of this truck with all the shit in the fertilizer and escaped to the edge of the jungle, where they hiked to the refugee camp. So that's my personal connection with the past of Cambodia. And here in New Zealand, actually, when I was a kid, my parents took in 2 Cambodian refugees from the Khmer Rouge. So I grew up with a Cambodian brother and a Cambodian sister. So my links to Cambodia go back to childhood. And hearing these stories of war and atrocity that my brother and sister had gone through was pretty compelling and pretty deeply impacting for me.
Do you think that's part of what's made you just love Asia so much, and particularly Cambodia? Do you think that kind of young exposure to Khmer?
I think so. You know, I mean, what the eye has not seen, the heart cannot grieve. It's very hard for us to imagine places we just heard about on the internet or something. But when we have a personal connection, we have a personal relationship, then our level of commitment grows. Our willingness to sacrifice grows. And so this is one of the reasons I am a proponent of us being a part of the world. Not saying, well, if I ever set foot on another nation, then I'm a terrible person. I have no right to be anywhere else other than my own country. But to say we desperately need each other. We need to learn from Cambodians. They have things to learn from us. It's a mutual relationship where we can love and serve one another as brothers and sisters. So.
Oh, yeah, I love that so much. And I think that story about Nay's mum is really powerful but really risky.
Yeah, I mean, they were hiking through the jungle past dead bodies who had been blown up by landmines and hoping to avoid those same landmines themselves. So it was the fact that they even got through was pretty amazing. And many didn't, of course. And then just think of what happened at the other end. A little Presbyterian church in Tamaki Makaurau welcomes them in and takes them in and helps them to get acclimatized and accustomed to New Zealand culture and shows Nay what cheese is. And they really took, I mean, Nay's mum couldn't speak any English. So Nay, at 5 years old, arrives in New Zealand and is the translator for the family. And it's navigating everything that you navigate. So, you know, there's that whole connection with how do we welcome people in our own backyard, refugees, people who have come from other nations as well. So we're all interconnected. To deny it or be paralyzed by our interconnectedness is foolishness. We are interconnected. And the question is, how do we relate to that interconnectedness, to our brothers and sisters in healthy ways, not in white savior or colonizing or other ways that are unhealthy and evil.
Yeah. I feel like anybody who's spent any time across cultures has begun to see what beauty another people group holds.
Yeah.
And but I think you do have to take on a posture of learning though, right?
Absolutely. I mean, what do we know? What do we know as we enter another culture? You just simply look at those who come to New Zealand, perhaps not speaking English, from a different culture, you know, just observing the challenges they face in navigating what's going on here. You can imagine on the flip side, those same challenges as we go into their nation. So, yeah, there's a lot of learning to do. There's no excuse for going out with a know-it-all, triumphalistic, kind of victorious attitude. We're not bringing Jesus to them. Jesus is already there. And so there's a lot to learn. What is going on in this place? What is the conversation that God is already having with these people?
I wanted to kind of ask you about communism. So we had Shamsi is a sociology lecturer here at Vic, and we've had him on this podcast, and he's a Marxist.
Okay.
And there's been some conversation around communism and things.
Mm-hmm.
So the Khmer Rouge is arguably the result of communism applied in the real world. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm a follower of Jesus, and I think that call means that I'm called to love my neighbors. And so I'm very interested in politics, because politics is how we love our neighbors in public. It's how we affect the policies that affect our neighbors. But just to say up front, I'm not a political scientist or philosopher like your lecturer, but I am someone who has seen the aftermath of communism. So while I lean very far left politically, generally speaking, I don't see how using the power of the nation state to force people in a particularly extreme direction, it doesn't seem to have worked historically. Now, what has worked is the Jesus picture of sharing and holding things in common, which is a beautiful invitation. And I look at Acts 2 and Acts 4, where the earliest followers of Jesus who had sat at his feet and listened to him, and then after Jesus is no longer on earth, to say, well, how are we going to live this out? And actually, they'd already been living it out. But in Acts 2 and Acts 4, it says they shared everything in common. They sold what they had and brought it to help the poor. And then one of the most incredible lines in all of human literature, there were no needy persons in their midst. In other words, those earliest followers of Jesus with this beautiful vision of voluntarily sacrificing began to build this society where poverty was overcome. To me, that's a beautiful vision that I want to participate in. So that's one of the reasons why we actually ended up, as a social enterprise, as a business, ended up building a camp in Cambodia, the first camp in Cambodia. I asked the question, why do Kiwi kids all get to have their pick of, dozens of amazing camps in New Zealand, where the Cambodian kids who have never had a chance to get out of the slum, to go and see the ocean for the first time, feel the sand between their toes for the first time, and experience camp together. So that's one of the things we did. Not to kind of enact communism, but to live out this beautiful vision that I think Jesus's vision of community is superior to communism, just on a couple of points. And the history of Christian community is much more beautiful and much more fruitful than the history of communism.
You had this amazing story about the table outside your place during kind of the first COVID lockdown in Cambodia. I feel like that speaks to what you've just said. For sure. So COVID lockdown, right? You guys went through that here in New Zealand, and you benefited from a government that wanted to be fairly transparent. Some might debate that, but 1 p.m. every day, you got to know what was going to happen. In Cambodia, it was more like announcement pops out, and within an hour, things are happening. So our lockdown was announced with about an hour's notice, and the whole city erupted in chaos. People rushed out to try to get some food, long lines at the ATMs. So I went out, I went out and got a few bags of food. My wife, Nay, goes next door, little shack next door, eight of our neighbors all living in one little shack. And they come back. Their father also went out, and he comes back with like 2 cans of fish in like a tiny little bottle of oil. I'm like, is that all? And they say, is that all you've got for, we don't know how long we're going to be in lockdown. And they're like, well, that's all we could afford, because what we earn that day is what we use to buy food. And we don't have a fridge anyway to store anything. So as you can imagine,
as the soldiers rolled out the barricades, because when they do a lockdown in Cambodia, they take it seriously. They literally rolled out barricades. They literally were putting barbed wire at the ends of our streets so we couldn't leave our neighborhoods. Just as a side note, please don't talk to me about tyranny in New Zealand. I mean, let's get real. So anyway, we're there and we are locked down under soldiers' watch, with massive guns and all of this. And the poor can't leave to make any money. Many people are starting to starve. And it actually becomes a very dire situation. This is 2021. So we got on a Zoom call with some of our alongside-us leaders, and we're saying, what can we do? Well, our neighbors are starving. Some of them report, there have been people who've organized like rice distributions, have managed to get through the soldiers to distribute rice, but then the powerful in the community just take it all for themselves. Those with political connections or just power take it themselves. So that may not work, and it just doesn't foster a good sense of who we are anyway as a movement. We're about loving our own neighbors, not necessarily bringing in resources from outside. So one of us just said, what if we were to put a table out the front of our house and just put what we could possibly spare on that table and make a sign in Cambodian language that would say, those who have extra, please add to this table, and those who are in need, help yourself. It sounded much cooler in Cambodian, actually. It was like, me some time net qua some yo. It's a little bit more pithy in Cambodian. Yeah. And then we made that a hashtag because it's 2021 by this stage. You've got to have a hashtag. So then we said, well, we'll not only do that, but then we will take a photo of it and tag our friends on Facebook and challenge them to do it. And so we had this community table challenge. And what's just so beautiful, we did this together with some of our neighbors who wanted to participate. And we're just putting out, a couple of extra bananas. And this old lady across the road, she comes across and she says, I've got a cucumber to contribute to the table. And we're like, well, why don't you also take something? So she says, okay. And she picks up a couple of eggs and then hobbles back to her little shack. And that just, for me, just captures the essence of the beauty of working in a community with what the community has, encouraging that spirit of sharing. And, those who are people of faith, whenever we talk about spirit in the community spirit, I like to think that's like the Holy Spirit is stirring. And it was a beautiful movement that actually spread all over the country, hundreds of these community tables just popping up, not just Christians, but just people who got the vision. And it was really cool to see. Even those who economically would be considered poor are able to participate in this vision of sharing, which is so Jesus, so Jesus.
So when Rachel and I were discussing what we'd read of your book, there was one section that we were really excited about. And you write, this book is for every person who has a passionate longing to see God's love change the world, but a distaste for the negative baggage of traditional colonial missions. It is for every globally minded follower of Jesus who recognises that the world doesn't need more white saviours, or saviours of any colour, but it also doesn't need more apathetic or disengaged Christians. It is for those who know that our guilt and tears, our thoughts and prayers mean nothing to the poor and marginalised in the majority world unless they are matched with action.
Yeah.
It's a powerful statement there.
Yeah, that's why I wrote the book. I called it Subversive Mission because subversive is something that comes from below and brings change. So my second book was called Subversive Jesus because Jesus acts from below and brings change. And then he invites us into subversive mission. Whether we're here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, or we're anywhere, we're called to acts of subversion, bringing change from below. And so the subtitle is Serving as Outsiders in a World of Need. So recognizing that we are outsiders in many of the places we go, recognizing that we carry with us power and privilege and resources that change the game. If we go out there without that self-awareness, we are fools. We must recognize that when we go into a place of poverty, just the fact that we speak English as a first language, our networks, our resources, our passport even, gives us access to resources and privilege that most people don't have. So what does it look like then to serve in that context? Is there a way, or is it just as soon as you even consider that, you are a white savior, and so then the response of many is just complete paralysis? Okay, then I will never consider being a part of a community in Kenya or Cambodia or Myanmar, because there is no other possible role for me other than white savior. I wrote this book to suggest that perhaps there are other postures and roles that we could take if we do the work first of understanding where we're coming from and gaining a framework and an understanding of how we might enter into those places. So if I could just backtrack a little bit, Jesus is born in Bethlehem, right? So he's born actually in the context of colonialism, of empire, because the Romans forced his family to go to Bethlehem for a census. So here the empire, the Roman Empire, the colonists, Jesus is born in the shadow of that. Even just his birth, his place is dictated by the empire, by the colonists, right? And they go there for a census. Census is for two reasons: to figure out how much tax they can get, how much money they can extract from the population, and how many men of fighting age they either have to suppress or recruit into their army. So it's about the military, it's about power and money. Empire is always about power and money. Those are the twin pillars of empire. Those are the twin pillars of colonialism. And so whenever we engage in the world as people who have power and money and use power and money in ways that don't empower, we are engaging in empire. We are engaging in colonialism. Then is there another way? I mean, is there a way to be in the world without leveraging our power and money? Yes, there is. It's what I want to suggest is that there is a way to be in the world without leveraging power and money to disempower those who don't have those things. It's not just about, okay, then we're going to make sure they have power and money. So we're going to make them like Westerners. That's just more, we're just spreading the gospel of consumerism and capitalism then. And a lot of development activity is actually just that. It's like, well, how do we make everybody middle class like us? But I believe that Jesus has a more beautiful vision and is already stirring. And that's the thesis of this book, is that Jesus is already at work. He's already stirring up leaders from within the community. And our role is not to go and save them or to use our money and power to save them, but to come alongside them and encourage them and strengthen their hand. We are the sidekicks. We don't get to be the superheroes. We get to be the sidekicks.
So I came and visited you and your wife earlier this year, and I was just picking your brains about missions. And I think I came back from Cambodia and I'd seen missions done pretty well, but I'd also seen it done kind of badly in some cases. And I came back, I guess, just confused and disgruntled with missions. And I was like, oh my gosh, it doesn't really actually always feel like it's for the people. And you said to me, you need to read my book.
I wrote it for you.
It's for people like myself and Anna who care about the world, and we want to see justice come. Yeah. We want to see kingdom come, but...
Yeah. And, you recognize that the alternative, or the false dichotomy that we're offered, which is just disengagement and apathy and, doing nothing, is not good enough. Like, I'm here to say it's not good enough. We can do better for our brothers and sisters around the world. We can learn from them, but we can be a part of rebuilding something that is more beautiful than what the world has to offer.
Mm-hmm. On that, you've talked in the book a little bit about the different modes of kind of acting and living missionally, whether you're an insider in the context that you're in or an outsider.
Yeah.
We were really struck by the fact that, like, it is so true that there are amazing local leaders, local apostles, local prophets, people who are, like, born and raised and rooted in those contexts that have those gifts to offer their communities. And we were kind of struck with, okay, so what is the need for an outsider then? If I can kind of provoke you to expand on that a bit more.
What's the role of an outsider? Well, just to unpack that insider-outsider stuff, and that language may or may not be helpful for you. John Perkins, the civil rights leader in the United States, uses the term Remainers as those who choose to stay in their community. They are insiders. They choose to stay and be a part of rebuilding their community. Then he talks about returners, those who are from that community, but they return. So like my wife, Nay, is from Cambodia, but she chose to return and serve her own people with the skills and advantages and connections she's gained from being outside the community. And then the role of relocators, which is outsiders, people who choose to relocate and be a part of rebuilding that community. And John Perkins suggests that we need all three. We need all three. Now, at the center will be the Remainers, will be the insiders, because those are the people who must lead in the long term. But what an incredibly sad situation where we say, well, you guys go for it, and we're not going to be of any kind of encouragement or assistance to you. You know, it's all on you. And especially people who are completely downtrodden by oppression and poverty, to say to them, we're not going to stand in solidarity with you. You got this. is actually pretty sad. If we're to love our brothers and sisters, then we're to ask, how can I love and be alongside you even in your suffering? And so I believe in a world of interdependence, not a world where we just create pockets of independence. I think that's more of a biblical vision, that we hold hands across the nations. We stand in solidarity with those who are on the margins. I think that's a more beautiful way to live. And so the question isn't, do we leave them alone? It's simply, how do we join them in ways that are healthy and not undermining, but they are strengthened through that process. Mm-hmm. So we, as outsiders, we bring certain things that insiders do not have. Aung San Suu Kyi said, use your liberty to promote ours. We bring a network. I have a platform online of people that I can tell about the atrocities in Myanmar right now. That's a Burmese person who perhaps may not even speak English, but may be a freedom fighter right there in Myanmar right now, doesn't have that access. So how do I amplify that person's voice? That's just one example of what we might bring into the picture. Now, we shouldn't go in with assumptions of this is what I bring and this is what I'm going to do. We need to listen and learn first. But believe me, there are many, many things that we can participate in and offer.
And you do this, you kind of explore these ideas through the lens of the fivefold ministry.
Yeah, so in Ephesians 4, there's kind of this framework that many Christians will be familiar with. It's kind of like one of the first personality type tests. It's kind of like, what's your gifting? What's your strength? Paul talks about the apostles who are kind of pioneers. They start new things. He talks about the prophets who speak truth to justice. They fight against oppression. He talks about the evangelists who want to spread good news. He talks about teachers who have expertise to share. And he talks about pastors or shepherds who care for the people. But my reading of that is that makes a lot of sense, and the way that we've applied it makes a lot of sense where we are insiders, where there's no power differential. But as soon as we kind of go into situations where we hold a lot of power, we hold a lot of resources, we need to reframe those. So that's what I'm doing in that book. So take, for example, the prophet, the role of the prophet. Where if I'm a protest leader in the streets of Wellington, fighting for housing rights, could I suggest that perhaps your role in Phnom Penh, Cambodia might look a little bit different? You're not to lead the protests. You're to become an ally who amplifies the voices of those who lead the protests, who speak out against injustice. So, for example, in Cambodia, land rights, and you could call it housing, is similarly a major issue. I've been evicted from slums twice. And some of our folks who had been evicted from a slum, a group of women, Cambodian women, they were just so fed up with being evicted and their land being stolen. They took their wooden beds and put them right at the intersection, one of the busiest intersections in Cambodia. They just stuck their beds right in the middle and said, we got nowhere to sleep. And so we're here. And of course, within like minutes, they're arrested. And within hours, they're actually charged. And that very day, they were sent to prison for a year. Now, those are the prophets of Cambodia. And what a sad thing if we say we have no role. They'll be okay. They're rotting in prison. What if we were to say instead, well, how can I come as an ally to these women who have everything being thrown at them, everything crushing them? How can I amplify their voice? How can I encourage them? Not as the leader of the initiative, but as an ally who strengthens their hand, who gets the word out. So that's an example.
You also talk in your book about your experience in Democracy Square, your kind of prophetic protest against the election and some of the political things that were going on at that time. Can you speak to what the value of that was? Like, there was such a high risk in you uptaking that action, a different risk to your Cambodian friends taking the same action, of course. But I guess, I don't know how to articulate this well.
What was the point?
What was the point? Like, what kind of
damn point?
What was the point of that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we have to ask that about all the prophetic actions throughout the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there was very little success or impact. And those of us who are called to live prophetic lives really need to grapple with the reality that prophetic action very, very rarely results in change or impact, at least that we can see. And so it's much more of a call to faithfulness and to solidarity. So leading up to the elections, I meet with a group of Cambodian Christian leaders who are passionate about issues of justice. I don't lead the group, I just participate. We were talking about what can we do during this election. The government has jailed all the opposition. So this is not a free election at all, even though they pretend it is. Same prime minister for the last 37 years. So we're like, what can we do? We know we will just be instantly crushed like bugs if we do anything. So then all that's left to us is to lament. And so I just asked the question, how do Cambodians mourn? How do they lament? And they said, well, when our father dies or our mother dies, we shave our heads. We wear all white. We pin a piece of black cloth to our shirt. And then we got into a discussion of, well, that's what we should do on election day. And I said, well, what if we would go down to Democracy Square and do that and just pray, shaven heads and obviously lamenting for the death of freedom in our country. And they said, well, if we go down there, we will be dead by the end of the day with a bullet in our head and our bodies will be floating in the Mekong River. But Craig, you could do it because you're a foreigner. You could get away with it. And I said, okay. All right. So I consider this and I decided, this is the right thing to do. So leading up to that day, we're kind of we each go to the barber. It costs $1 in Cambodia. Yeah, it's awesome. We're all getting our heads shaved and sending photos to each other in this private WhatsApp group, just saying, here, I'm getting mine shaved. And this one of them is bald already, and so we're hassling him saying, oh, come on, you're cheating, man. You didn't even have to shave anything. Anyway, a couple of days before the election, the photo of me getting my head shaved pops up. It's starting to get forwarded around. Not from our group. Like, it was a very small group who are very security conscious, like paranoid. And it gets forwarded to one of the other Cambodians in the group. And he says, from a friend, he says, where did you get this photo? The person who forwarded it to him says, we were at this government meeting about activists and dissidents that we need to keep an eye on. And we thought it was funny that there was a foreigner shaving his head in the Cambodian way. So, yeah, that's where I took the photo. He took it of the screen on the wall that was showing my photo. And so we're like, how did they get my photo? This is really bad. So then, of course, I have to, again, think, what are the consequences if I go through with this action? Now, as it turns out, and I did go down to Democracy Square on that day. I decided to go in solidarity. I decided to take on a level of risk. And as it turns out, I wasn't arrested. I just hung out with homeless folks in Democracy Square that day. But I think, those kinds of acts say to our brothers and sisters, we care about you. And it's not just saying, well, too bad that those things are happening to you. But we're saying, can I walk alongside you a little bit and perhaps be of some encouragement to you? And I believe that even if nobody knew, there's an element of faithfulness and solidarity that is worthwhile. That only makes sense perhaps in the spiritual realm. I don't know. But I want to be a person who doesn't just say, my brothers and sisters are suffering, so be it, too bad. I want to be someone who says, I'll be with you. I'll be with you.
I feel like in the West, we have quite a big appetite for white saviour storytelling, to have kind of a hero that is white. And you talk in your book about like kind of some of the figures, the movies and the books that we read that include these kinds of narratives. Yeah. You also talk about the dangers of this kind of storytelling. So could you speak a little bit more to that and how then we can share stories of transformation and hope in these spaces?
Yeah. So, I mean, telling stories is really powerful. Jesus pretty much told stories because stories really stick in our minds and in our hearts, and stories can transform. And so we must be storytellers. The danger is that with the white savior narrative is that it's the person of power and privilege who is always framed as the one who is responsible for bringing all that transformation. And that sends a really loud message to those who are not people with privilege in that same situation, that the answer is not within yourselves or with God's help. It's to look to outside people and outside resources. And so that just simply reinforces the message they've been told all their life of, you have nothing to offer in this situation, you're pathetic, you're hopeless. Your only hope is that someone would come with loads of money and maybe white skin to come and help you out, which is a very disempowering message and results in the opposite of what we hope. If we want to see transformation, we need people to believe that their actions can result in change. And so the white savior narrative undermines change. And if we are people who are not satisfied with the status quo, then we cannot perpetuate this white savior narrative because it undermines what needs to take place. So those of us who come as outsiders, there is a role, as I've already said, there is a clear role, but not to be at the center, not to be the ones that the story is about, but to be those perhaps who tell the story outside, who share the stories. Now, how we tell stories is important. I think many of us have kind of reflected on those advertisements we've seen. And to be honest, I'm kind of shocked that Save the Children in New Zealand is still posting advertisements on TV that portray African people as complete victims and, distended stomachs. I mean, I thought those advertisements went out in the 80s when we realized that that's not a helpful picture to portray. And so many of us have moved on from telling stories in that way where we paint people as complete victims. But we absolutely must describe the tragedy that's unfolding. We absolutely must describe the injustice. We absolutely must describe the poverty. But the way to do that in a balanced and healthy way is to couple it by talking of the ways in which the people have resilience, have strength, have overcome. And so finding that right balance between tragedy and resilience in our storytelling is really the key. And so we tell stories that are true and are not just one-sided. Well, if we only speak of their resilience, it's like, well, look at these happy people in the slums who are so happy with their poverty and they're going around smiling all the time. That's bullshit. They have all kinds of struggles. They have all kinds of issues that they are dealing with if you will learn their language and get to know them and listen to their stories. So a true story will not only speak of their resilience or not only speak of their tragedy, but speak of those two things together.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of a story. My friend Sinyet in Cambodia, it was just the most beautiful thing she told me one day was that so the coups of the Khmer Rouge were happening right up until the year 2000. And she'd witnessed a number of them in her hometown. and she was really afraid of balloons popping. Because of the sounds that it made, and it was just, but she was working with kids and she was doing these kids clubs and things, and so one day she just like let herself into her office and closed the door and blew up a whole bunch of balloons and just popped them over and over and over again until she was like no longer scared. She just asked the Lord, like, would you bless me with the resilience to kind of like hear the sound and no longer be afraid. And now she can do balloons as much as she wants to.
That's overcoming. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And so many of, like, my experience of Cambodians was that that's exactly what they were, like who they were as resilient people.
Yes. I mean, there's a great deal of resilience and perseverance. And those are the things that we can learn from and be inspired by.
It's a gift to us, to get to hear those stories and to get to meet those individuals.
I mean, I'm really interested to hear more about the animal farm story. Are you happy to talk a bit more about that story in that climate?
I mean, you know, as we journey in solidarity with people who are facing injustice, again, sometimes we might be in situations of danger ourselves. So this same group that did the election thing, soon after that we decided to go on a retreat to this campsite, Shalom Valley, that I was talking about before. And we were up on a balcony. We'd been hanging out all day, and we wanted to show a movie, wanted to project it on the wall. And I've been involved in an animation studio in Cambodia, training up young Cambodians to make animations for change. And one of them had taken Animal Farm, the original, like 1956, I think, animated story. It still holds up really well. Look it up on YouTube.
George Orwell.
Yeah,
Legend.
George Orwell, great book that we all read at college. Anyway, so she had taken this animation and added Cambodian subtitles to it. And she said, should we upload it to YouTube, Craig? And I'm like, I think the political tension right now is pretty high. Let's just hold back. Because there was an election coming up, and there was a lot going on. But she was like really proud of her work, so she just uploaded it. And then she's like, Craig, I just uploaded it anyway. So I'm like, okay, well, that's cool. Why don't we show that at this retreat? So we'll show it on the wall, and it'll just be an interesting thing to watch. So we start watching this Animal Farm, and now go back and have a look. It's really got a real revolutionary feel to it, more than I had remembered. And like the sheep are like standing there with pitchforks, like, we're going to overthrow the farm. We're taking down Farmer Brown or Farmer Jones, whatever. We're taking him down. Like, it's just like this very revolutionary feel to it. And so I'm sitting there going, oh man, this is a little bit more political than we could probably get away with. And then right around then, one of the young Cambodian leaders just taps me on the shoulder and says, there's 3 police here. They're standing downstairs. We're up on a balcony outside, projecting on the wall. So they're down below the balcony. So they can see us and they can see the movie on the wall. And they're like, what are you guys doing? And so this young Cambodian woman who's part of the group comes to me and says, there's police here. And I said, shall I go down and talk to them? I speak Cambodian, but sometimes I get upset with the police. So they've realized, keep Craig to the side. So she said, no. You'll make it worse. I'll go down and talk to them. So she goes down and they say, what are you doing? And she says, oh, nothing really. We're just watching a children's movie. And from the angle they're standing, they cannot see the subtitles. So they actually don't realize what's going on in this movie. And they literally stand there with her for the next 2 hours watching the entire movie without any idea of what the movie is about. And it's just this amazing, like, example or story of, you know, eyes being closed. And, you know, there is something, you know, I believe God is with us. The Spirit moves. Things happen that are sometimes beyond our understanding. And for me, that was just a classic moment of, wow, their eyes were closed. If they had been slightly taller, they could have seen the subtitles and figured out what was going on.
It's like a holy intervention.
Yeah.
On that, You talk in your book a little bit about secularism and kind of that being a danger. I just found your story about Roxy being ill and then going to the clinic for medicine for her, and then you actually realizing like, oh, I really rely on medicine, and there is a real spiritual element to healing. And can you share a little bit of that story and why you think it's important for us to just challenge our Western secularism?
I mean, I think we compartmentalize. Many of us have a very Western way of thinking about the world, which is actually much more about secularism and all of those things. So, we had this little girl in our neighborhood. We were living in a slum, which was notorious for prostitution, generational. So this little girl's name, she was probably 3 years old, was Roxy, which means working girl, like working, Roxy. Her sister's name was Diamond. And so there we used to just open up our front area. We had Lego, and the local kids would just find this place of kind of safe haven to play with Lego and just be kids. And Roxy is kind of propped up in the corner. Normally she'd be playing. And I said to Diamond, what's wrong with Roxy? And she says, I don't know. She can't walk today. And so I kind of pick up Roxy, and her legs are kind of dangling below her. I take her around the corner to her mother and say, what's wrong? And she's kind of starts crying and says, well, Roxy hasn't been able to walk for the last 24 hours. I don't know what's wrong. And I've got to look after these other babies that I'm trying to look after. So I'm like, well, do you want to go to the clinic? And she's like, well, I can't go anywhere, but can you take Roxy to the clinic? So me and my daughter, Micah, prop up Roxy between us on the motorbike, and we go off to the clinic. And the doctor says she's malnourished. She just needs these vitamins and these medicines and stuff. So I take it back, give it to the mother, and say, give her these. She's malnourished, then she'll be okay. The next morning, I kind of hear this commotion out the front of their house. And I go around, and the neighbors have kind of gathered around, and they've hired this kind of healer type person who you have to pay them. They'll come and they will chant these incantations, and they blow on the person. So there's these rituals that they do. And I'm like, what are they doing? And they're like, she's paid him to come in and heal Roxy. So then I'm kind of like, well, I kind of already healed Roxy. So I'm like kind of annoyed and pridefully arrogant and upset. So I go stomping back to my wife, Nay, and I'm like, she just paid money. She has no money to feed them, but she's borrowed more money to pay this guy to come and blow on Roxy. So I was kind of pissed off. And Nay's like, come on, Craig. I mean, you know what Cambodians believe, that all sickness and all of those things are all interconnected, spiritual, physical, emotional, all of those things are interconnected. And so you may bring a physical response, but if there's still a spiritual element that hasn't been addressed, then they don't feel like it's been addressed. So I'm like, all right then. And then like a day later, Roxy's mother comes by all happy, and she's like, Roxy's been healed. I'm so glad I brought in that fortune teller guy and I'm like, come on. So anyway, I just sit with it and talk to a few more of my Cambodian friends. And about a month later, the kids come in again, and they're like, oh, look, Uncle Craig, Roxy's got a big cut on her foot, and it's kind of infected. Can you help her? Because they're like, Uncle Craig's got some medicine, and he knows a little bit what to do. So I'm like, okay, come, gather around. Let's all just gather around here. And I get out this betadine, like this purple medicine stuff, and you paint it on, and it's supposed to disinfect it and stuff. I paint it on, and then I say, should we just pray for healing of this foot? And so then I just start to chant in the Cambodian monks' way, the fortune teller way of chanting. Just something like, just something like that. And I say, you can just chant like this to Jesus and to ask for healing. Whenever you're sick, you don't have to pay anyone, because there is healing that's freely available to people. Yeah, it was just my attempt, foolish attempt to perhaps learn a little bit more of a sense of integration between our physical and our spiritual. And that might sound really woo-woo to some people, but as Westerners, many of us kind of lean towards just that very kind of physical understanding of the world.
It's the same interconnectedness, don't you think, that you were talking about before when it comes to just one another?
Yeah.
It's just that holistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that interconnectedness is something that we Westerners actually, it's hard for us to grasp. If I could kind of frame it with this sense of where Western European understanding in the world comes from. We trace it back to Greece. The Greek thinkers and philosophers kind of were the founders of our Western European way of thinking and culture. But for Asians and Eastern people, that can be traced back to China, where the Eastern philosophers and Chinese thinkers. And so very different contexts. In China, people's lives revolve around growing rice. You grow rice, you need water, you need irrigation, and that means you must cooperate with your neighbors. If you make the village chief angry, he could cut off your water and you will die. Rice is eaten, New Zealand, we don't realize rice is 3 times a day. If you don't eat rice, you have not eaten. And so right from the very foundations of Asian kind of culture and practice, they must live in harmony with one another or they will die. Now go over to Greece, we're hunting and fishing, and if we make Uncle Aesop down the road angry, doesn't really matter. Who cares? In fact, we can go down and debate Uncle Aesop down in Athens and have these big arguments and debates, and there's no consequences. So we live lives of complete individualism and liberty and freedom for ourselves. And that has flowed through into particularly kind of European and American, white American, and Pākehā New Zealand way of thinking about the world. Obviously, Māori Pacific cultures are much closer to the Eastern way of thinking, where harmony is so important. And so, I've spent many, many years in Cambodia, and every year I just get to new depths of understanding my own individualistic outlook on the world. From day one, our children are put in a little room by themselves, the baby's room. Whereas Cambodian children sleep with their whole family in one room, sometimes up until they're 18. They're sleeping in the same bed with their parents. Just every single aspect of life that you could even imagine is either very individualistic or very kind of community-oriented. And that makes a huge difference even to the way we understand the gospel. How do we explain what it means that Jesus died for us? He died, from an individualistic perspective, it's kind of it's between me and God. Jesus died for me. I'm saved. Who cares about my family? Doesn't mean anything. Has hardly any impact on the decision. For Cambodians, it's if I become a Christian, who will bury my mother in the traditional Buddhist way? Our whole family will be dishonored. What about my ancestors? All of these things. So we have to confront our different way of thinking. It's not wrong, but it's different. And unless we're self-aware, then again we go in with ignorance and it doesn't help.
And there's a large cost with choosing Jesus in a country like Cambodia, no?
Well, there is, but sometimes we make the cost higher than it should be. We make it worse because we ask people to walk away from their culture and their family and their traditions unnecessarily, ridiculously. And so those who make that choice, many of them make massive sacrifices. And yes, of course, to follow Jesus takes, sacrifice, but not unnecessary sacrifice. I'll give you an example. In Cambodia, they use incense to worship their ancestors. Every day they light sticks of incense. And so when missionaries first came, they said, well, that's a bad practice. So don't do that and worship Jesus in this way. And so Cambodian Christians never use incense in their worship, even though it's found throughout the Old Testament. You got people lighting incense in Solomon's temple and all of these things, right? They, that's where we ask for sacrifice that is unnecessary. In Mongolia, they were wiser, the missionaries, when they saw that yak milk is so central to the way they worship, because milk is like the liquid of life. They would toss a glass of yak milk into the air for the gods. And so rather than saying, no more milk tossing, the missionaries simply said, why don't you toss that milk to the one true God, to Jesus? And every time you want to toss milk to the gods, toss it to Jesus and say, thank you, Jesus, for this milk. And so, a slight redirection, but retaining culture, retaining practice, that is so important. I mean, you look at Paul visiting, the Apostle Paul visiting the city of Athens, and he looks at all these idols, and he doesn't go around smashing them. He says, look at this idol that you've built to the gods, the unknown God. Let me tell you about that God. So it's this bridging from the known to the unknown. And I think that's really powerful.
I noticed that a lot of churches in Cambodia were set up in a very, kind of got a band of, 8 to 10 people. You've got a drummer, you've got a keyboard, you've got a couple of electric guitars and a bass, and 4 lead singers. And then you mentioned this in your book as well. They'll sing translated versions of songs by Bethel and Hillsong and initially I think I felt completely comfortable with it, and the longer I was there, the more I was like, this feels really sad. These guys have such a beautiful culture and background, and when they sing, it's from deep within them, and then they're trying to fit their beautiful Khmer creative voices into this Western way of worship. Would you be able to speak to...
Well, I mean, I think we need to recognize that there's nuance, because we live in a globalizing world. And so, part of our role is to uphold culture and encourage them and say, it's all right to worship Jesus in your cultural way. Do it. Go for it. But also recognizing that they get their cultural influences. Culture changes. And they're getting their cultural influences from YouTube and the internet and all kinds of places. And young people in particular are increasingly globalized. And so they are going to have other ways of wanting to worship. And so I think there's freedom, as long as they sense that freedom, as long as they're like, we could worship in this traditional Cambodian way if we wanted to, but we'd also like to kind of be a rock band at the same time. I think there's grace and freedom, but we don't want to be the bringers of that westernized culture. We simply want to be people who strengthen and encourage.
And is the way to not be the bringers of our Western culture without realizing it, is that a process of recognizing what our kind of cultural influences and norms are and our positionality, so that when we're in that space, we're not assuming that is the norm and kind of...
Yeah, I mean, we're always going to be bringing a lot just because it's who we are, Yeah. And that's okay, but we come as learners. And one of the postures that I think we can do, and this might be surprising to you actually, is we can be learners and scholars of local customs and actually help our Cambodian friends or our local friends understand those in ways that they perhaps didn't. So with our Cambodian team, every time there was a Buddhist festival or ceremony, I would go deep into what is the background of this? What does it mean? And then what does that mean in the light of what Jesus teaches? How could we slightly tweak it, or how could we embrace it? So most of them had just been taught, you just reject everything from Buddhism, from culture, you reject it all. So I kind of took on this role of, let's have conversations. What does this Phnom Penh festival mean? Where's it coming from? What's the roots? And almost very often they had no idea of the background of their own practices. So, of course, there are many Cambodians who do, but the young people that I was journeying with very often didn't. You see that in the life of William Carey, who was a great scholar of the local culture, a translator of ancient literature. And so he was someone who strengthened local culture, and we can do that too as well.
These are all some pretty big issues and things to think on. And kind of one of the things we really are keen to hear from those we are interviewing is, where do you draw your hope from?
I draw my hope actually from the young alongside us in the movement. I mean, these are young people, 18, 20, many of them living in slum shacks in rural villages. I think of Rachel in Malawi, who we asked them to choose their own little brother and sister. It's part of the sense of ownership. She said that she lived in a village, again, notorious for trafficking, and she was praying and asking God to show her who should be her little sister. She looks out her window and sees her neighbor Esther, about 8 years old, being taught how to dance seductively for men by her own family. And in that moment, Rachel says, that's my little sister. But Rachel's living literally in a mud house. Like, I've been to her house, literally in a house made of mud. And so these are, and you know, that story, again, could be replicated thousands and thousands of times over across many countries. And of course, Rachel becomes Esther's alongside her, and Esther gets back into school, and Esther's life is transformed by just her neighbor who decided to love her. Despite all the challenges, the poverty that Rachel lives in, she's making a difference. I was at a camp in Cambodia, and a young alongside her, she's quite a short young woman, about 5 foot. And she gets up and says, my little sister has an announcement to make. And her little sister gets up. She's about another foot taller than her. And she hands the little sister the microphone. Little sister says, I want to point out to you, my alongside. She might be small in stature, but in the kingdom of God, she's a mighty warrior. She has walked alongside me for 6 years since I was half her size. And now I'm much taller than her. And today I want to announce that I'm ready to become an alongside her myself. You know, everyone just claps and celebrates. These are kids who grew up in a rural village who are making a difference. Mm-hmm. One last story. Right after that, an alongside her gets up and he says, I'm alone at this camp. My little brother's not here, and most of you know why, because 3 months ago he was playing with his friends in the floodwaters, and his friend fell in the water, and Noan was his name, jumped into the water to save his friend and pushed him out. Managed to get his friend to safety before he was washed away, and Noan lost his life that day. And of course we gathered around and cried and prayed with his alongside her. And you asked me what inspires me. It's young people around the world who are making a difference in the little pocket or corner that they are. They're willing to lay down their lives. They're willing to go out of their way. They're willing to sacrifice. They're not willing to be paralyzed by their theological gymnastics and conundrums. They say, I'm just going to love my neighbors. They don't have the education you have. They don't have the resources or networks you have, and yet they are willing to take a step. That's freaking inspiring to me. And if they can do it, why not I?
So, Craig, we want to hear, what is your most controversial opinion? If you were in a room with other people from your field, what is something you'd likely disagree with everyone about?
I don't know who you would say is in my field. I'm just carving out my own field right here, just doing my own weird thing. Yeah, pretty much wherever I go, there's things that people disagree. Welcome to join me on my Facebook page.
The comments
for some very interesting conversations. Craig Greenfield on Facebook.
It's true. You are one of the more colourful comment sections on my feed, I would
People
say.
get very angry.
I enjoy actually learning from the way you respond to some of those angry comments, just reading them and being like, oh, okay.
It takes a lot of... Sometimes I have to delete what I wrote, you know.
Do you have any book recommendations? Or do you have any books that have formed you that kind of, would be highlighted in your mind as something that's, been really formational?
Yeah, I mean, depends kind of where you're coming from. I grew up in the evangelical church, and so I was grew up, I feel like I heard every sermon, every Bible thing under the sun on church on Sundays. It was kind of disappointing, to be honest. It's just kind of missing the point. It didn't interest me. I walked away from it as a teenager. But later on, when I became a follower of Jesus, and I believe that Jesus is a radical revolutionary who the world has never seen, I realized that there are writers out there and thinkers who see that. So for me, books like I can see right there on your shelf, Colossians Remixed. We're here in the Chaplain Library, right? Colossians Remixed. Amazing take on the book of Colossians. Or some of Ched Meyer's books, Roll Away the Stone, Binding the Strong Man. Amazing takes on the book of Mark. He might not agree with everything he says, but at least he's saying some much more provocative and radical things that if we're not radical when we're young, where did we go wrong? And Jesus is the most radical teacher that has ever walked this earth. So let's not settle for the boring online sermons of Hillsong Church. Let's look beyond that and seek out those who have really plumbed the depths of the interesting gospels. And then on a more kind of like, the more kind of invitation into community aspect, I think Henri Nouwen's book, Compassion, Henri Nouwen in general is awesome, but his book, Compassion, is, for me, just an absolute game changer. I loved that book. Yeah. And then if you want something a little bit more accessible and readable, grab a copy of my book, Subversive Jesus. That was one of my earlier books, Subversive Jesus, about inner city Vancouver and what it looks like to try to follow Jesus in a Western context. Yeah.
And Subversive Mission.
Subversive Mission coming up November 1st. You can pre-order it online. Be the first.
This podcast will be released probably after it's been released, in which case we order it online.
Yeah, you can get it from wherever you get books from.
Oh, so any bookstore will have it.
Hopefully. Yeah,
cool.
Should do.
It's so interesting to hear from you. So thanks so much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your stories.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Get yourself a copy of Subversive Mission.
Right on.